Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. China's President Xi Jinping says both sides see good prospects for cooperation in AI, telecom, fraud and money laundering, calling on trade teams to narrow problems and extend cooperation to the comments. The comments come after Xi's high-level talks with President Donald Trump. A Pakistani security source says another round of peace talks with the Afghan Taliban is likely to be held in Istanbul after previous negotiations collapsed. The source says the talks come at Kabul's request amid growing cross-border tensions. French police arrest a third suspect over the multi-million euro Louvre jewel heist, French media reports. Investigators say the man was detained near Paris as authorities continue recovering the stolen crown jewels. A Russian lawmaker warns the United States' resumption of nuclear testing could usher in a return to unpredictability and confrontation. Moscow calls the move dangerous and destabilizing as global powers watch for escalation. President Trump says he's given South Korea approval to build a nuclear-powered submarine in a move that would put Seoul among an elite group of nations. The vessel will be built in a Philadelphia shipyard as Seoul agrees to buy more US oil and gas. Hurricane Melissa tears through the northern Caribbean after slamming Cuba and Jamaica with 185-mile-per-hour winds, the strongest storm ever to strike the island. At least 25 people were killed in Haiti as hundreds of communities remain cut off. Brazil's President Lula da Silva says the country cannot accept the scourge of organised crime after the deadliest police raid in Rio's history left at least 121 dead. He calls for coordinated action against drug gangs that doesn't endanger police or civilians. President Nicolas Maduro says Venezuela intercepted 3 aircraft used for drug trafficking in operations that coincide with a massive US military deployment in the Caribbean. He touted the strikes as proof of Caracas's own anti-drug efforts amid growing regional tensions. Chinese media has released President Xi Jinping's comments after his meeting with US President Donald Trump in South Korea earlier today. According to state media, Xi has said that both American and Chinese sides have good prospects for cooperation in fields such as artificial intelligence, countering telecom fraud, and money laundering. Xi has also reportedly said that China never wanted to challenge or replace anyone, and that the two sides should not fall into the vicious cycle of revenge. Chinese media has also reported that Trump and Xi have agreed to strengthen cooperation in energy and in trade. Xi has stated that the two sides should lengthen the list of cooperation and shorten their list of problems. He has also added that the sides should refine and follow up on the consensus that they have reached during their meeting. Okay, we're now joined by Dr. Astha Chadha Rutsin Kiman from Rutsin Kiman University, joining us from Kyoto, Japan. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Chadka, here on the program. Xi Jinping remarks a cooperative tone here, as always, of course. However, behind closed doors, we are unaware of what's going on. Is this a genuine thaw in diplomacy or just staged ahead of this APEC summit coming up?
Yeah, thank you, Thomas, for having me. Well, I mean, this meeting and the outcomes of this meeting clearly show that there is an indication of some sort of de-escalation, specifically given the tit for tat that was going on between US and China for a very long time. At the same time, it kind of shows a very weaponized approach to interdependence because it reveals the fragility of trade. It also reveals that the US was very dependent, or so is the rest of the world on China's rare earth exports. As for stability, I mean, I would read this more as mixed signals from United States and not really a win for the wider region and specifically for Indo-Pacific. Because if you look, as you clearly said, it shows more of a US approach under Trump, which is characterized by this focus on transactional diplomacy, wherein he might be willing to give up some of the previous long-held positions that the United States has maintained in return for some transactional favors that he's getting from China.
Dr. Chadha, what does it say about the relationship that trade deal, that those signatures were not put on that piece of paper today like was much anticipated?
True. I mean, it was anticipated, given that this is the first meeting between the two heads of states ever since President Trump took office. But at the same time, if you look at the deal, if you read between the lines, they're basically saying they're going to cooperate more, right? They're trying to immediately resume a large-scale purchases on both sides, whether that's of soybeans from the US or it's about China trying to cut down tariffs. What has not been clarified as to what is going to be the US long-held position when it comes to Taiwan, for instance. Because if I remember correctly, there was no mention of Taiwan. Neither was there a mention of a long-term or a near-term relief from any sort of uncertainty that exists for the rest of the region. So we should read it exactly how it is. Probably a de-escalation in trade tensions, a short-term sort of relief for both the sides, but not necessarily gains for the rest of the region.
Of course, and that leads me on to my next question. What does it mean for security, both national security for the United States and of course, the wider Indo-Pacific? You have the Taiwan issue, which Donald Trump says was not discussed at all during the meeting. They said that they will cooperate when it comes to the Russia and Ukraine war. Of course, Beijing, a close ally of Moscow. But, of course, Donald Trump announced so just before the meeting that Washington will resume nuclear testing. He also granted South Korea the permission to build a nuclear submarine in Philadelphia. What does this mean for the relationship?
I mean, exactly how you put it, it is pretty much, like I said, a very transactional approach. I mean, even when in providing security, it looks like US is, rather than showing more commitment and sort of a presence in the region, US currently seems to be more interested in getting more deals. So allowing South Korea to have a nuclear submarine should not be exactly seen as in some way upgrading or equipping South Korea with some measures, but rather as a deal that US wants, because it is the submarine would be built in United States and then be provided to South Korea, right? Secondly, there is a clear sort of inconsistency here, because this is going to lead to more nations in the Indo-Pacific to try to hedge. Now that they do not have a very reliable partner that they earlier saw in the United States, they're very likely to seek more partnerships. They are very likely to find their own ways, as we see, towards this new multipolarity that is setting in. So US, rather than achieving a longer base of its allies or partners in the region, it is trying to, in some way, with this duality in its approach, wherein it tries to punish one, such as India, over the others that are clearly doing similar actions when it comes to Russia. US seems to be doing this in a very bilateral manner rather than a regional manner. And hence, it's in some ways, it does put the entire idea of Indo-Pacific at risk, I would say.
Dr. Askta Chadha, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to get your insight. And thank you for taking the time. We now move on this hour, and meanwhile, the Shenzhen residents have been divided on whether US-China relationship will improve after the high-profile meeting between the two leaders. This was the first face-to-face meeting between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump since 2019. Let's listen in to what some of the Shenzhen residents had to say.
没什么希望，这个都谈崩了就谈崩了，中国早已习惯了，是不是？是不是？特朗普这个人是不是反复无常的？是不是？这个他现在说好了跟你和谈，是不是？说不定回去了，他又一个报道说，哎，怎么样的，是不是？这都已经习惯了，中国老百姓都已经习惯了，是不是？
就是你意思是特朗普说什么？
那美国人反复无常，这个全世界都知道啊，是不是？
因为我是做这个周围走的，我这种电工，我去到好多片区的厂房都是空一半的，就是因为这个关税有好多，像平山坑子，有些跟外贸关系的厂里面，有好多都是因为4月份的时候，它有一场关税战不扎了，马上出货，猛天出货。现在扎关税，有些厂就没班扎，有些厂区就没班扎，有些空厂房都是空了好多。就是整体来说，对这个深圳、珠三角的工业都有影响，加关税，影响还是蛮大。
Now, moving on, China's foreign ministry has issued a series of statements following the meeting between President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump in Busan. At a press briefing, the spokesperson said that Beijing hopes Washington will uphold its commitments under the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and maintain global strategic stability, after Trump announced the resumption of US nuclear weapons testing. On economic issues, China has urged the G7 to stop disrupting international trade with its proposed critical minerals alliance and to uphold market economy principles. The Commerce Ministry also announced that several countermeasures against the US will be paused for a year, including export controls and shipbuilding measures. Officials also said that both sides reached consensus on fentanyl cooperation and agriculture trade, and also confirmed that President Trump will visit China next year. Let's have a look at the press briefing by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Okay, apologies there. We seem to have had a technical issue. We move on to our next story. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has met Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney a day before the opening of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Lee and Carney are discussing key issues including defence, economy and cultural exchanges, and are scheduled to hold luncheon after the meeting. The meeting comes as Canada launches a new submarine acquisition program worth around $43.4 billion, with South Korean shipbuilders competing for the project. We are now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He is a journalist for the Korea Herald and he joins us live from Seoul. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Kumar. What is the strategic subtext in this meeting here? Of course, this submarine project is huge, and if South Korea win that project, it means a lot of jobs. What is the meaning behind it, and tell us a bit more about this diplomatic relationship.
Well, we have to understand the domestic perspective here in South Korea. The domestic perspective here is that South Korea should diversify the alliance relationship and translate it into the economic security aspects. So to achieve those economic security aspect of South Korea, they have not just to do things with US and traditional partners such as Europe, but also partners like Canada and emerging countries like Vietnam and other ASEAN countries. So this should be seen in that way. And Canada is a very important alliance for South Korea, because they have fought the Korean War together also, when 27,000 soldiers fought for Korean side, and the relationship is ironclad. Of course, it's not up to the level of US, but with Canada, the relationship is in good shape. And with this kind of projects, if Korea again try to expand their outreach in economic things, then definitely it is going to help South Korea in long run. And that is also part of a broader pragmatic diplomacy, because there has been some views here in South Korea just few months ago that President Lee Jae-myung is very pro-China kind of rhetoric they were trying to force. But for South Korean government, this is not just serving the interest of China or US. It is about serving the national interest. And that is why it should be seen as a pragmatic diplomacy and its expansion in the economic security.
How does Lee Jae-myung balance that, serving South Korean interest, balancing Western allies, also, of course, hedging China, preserving those interests in the Indo-Pacific, Dr. Kumar?
There is a bedrock of this like-mindedness and the democratic values, and these values are shared if you see from South Korean perspective, and that is why countries like South Korea, Europe, Canada, US, they have a shared commitment towards democracy and the rule-based order, and the like-mindedness make South Korea to be a natural partner. So while dealing with Europe, US, and Canada, South Korea has no hesitation, and they have good migration also from South Korea going towards Canada since decades. And as I mentioned, there is a historical friendship as well. And South Korean young generation is very much interested, and they are really fascinated about Canadian multiculturalism and these employment aspects. And that is why creating jobs to young youth, I mean young people here, it is going to help South Korean government a lot. And President Lee, he has to capitalize on the young voters, because the party that he belongs to, Democratic Party, his major voters are young males and females. Especially young males also have voted in large numbers this time to Lee Jae-myung, and that is why they would love to see if anything concrete on employment front is delivered from Lee Jae-myung, and it will help his ratings also. So I think he is right on track from economic security point of view, and also from political perspective. The conservatives in Korea, they have been very friendly with Canada as well, and they also consider Canada as natural partners. So you will not see any backlash from the Conservative Party on this front. So it's a win-win game for, both the parties in South Korea and the people. So it should be seen in that way in long run.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. It's always a pleasure to get your insight on these issues. We now move on once again, and a Russian lawmaker has responded to President Trump's announcement on the resumption of nuclear testing by America, saying that the announcement is a signal to a shift towards an era of unpredictability and open confrontation. This comes in a backdrop of Russian tests of a new Poseidon torpedo, reportedly capable of causing radioactive tsunamis. With Russia amping up its own nuclear-capable armaments testing, this announcement makes for troubling news, signalling a possible return to Cold War-era levels of confrontational nuclear weapons build-up between the world's leading nuclear powers. We're now joined by Professor Georgy Toleraya. He's a professor from the Russian Academy of Science in Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor Toleraya, for joining us here on the program. A Russian lawmaker has come out and said that this marks a return to unpredictability. Do you agree that nuclear deterrence is a destabilizing new phase here, especially in the era of Donald Trump?
Well, I would say that if we're talking about nuclear tests, we still have to find out what exactly President Trump meant. Because he said that he's given instructions to Pentagon to resume nuclear testing. Well, in fact, in the US, it's the Minister of Energy, the Department of Energy, who does the nuclear testing. Maybe he meant something else, like the testing of a nuclear-capable cruise missiles or something like this, not the actual resumption of nuclear testing. Although we know that such plans do exist, and Russia have repeatedly said that if anybody would resume nuclear testing, Russia will have to do it again, but hopefully it will not happen. So I personally, I presume it's just the Trump's emotional reaction to the tests of new nuclear missile, which is called Burevestnik or Stormbringer in English, which can travel across the world for many times, and also the Poseidon nuclear torpedo. So maybe it's just the figure of speech, not the exact instructions, so we'll have to wait and see. I hope that that won't happen, because the resumption of nuclear testing would lead to other countries doing the same, and it won't make the situation in the world any more stable.
Yes, and of course, Dr. Toleraya, this comes as Donald Trump does say that there are talks going on with Moscow for a new denuclearization treaty. Your thoughts on this announcement coinciding with that?
Yes, well, there's no nuclear talks going with Moscow, in fact, because, as you remember, Russia have suggested to discuss the strategic sum limitation treaty prolongation. Well, it is
apologies,
over,
Dr. Toleraya. Donald Trump said that today on Air Force One, just post the Xi Jinping summit.
Yes, I know, but we are not having any direct talks on nuclear weapons right now. Russia, in fact, have suggested that unilaterally to keep on its obligations under the nuclear treaty till next year, until it expires, and then there will be a possibility to talk about a prolongation of some new treaty or something. This suggestion have been answered by Trump or by U.S. side formally. So we cannot say that there is some kind of a process of talks going right now. Same with China. It's just Trump's idea and Trump's desire to have talks on the nuclear weapons, both with Russia and China, but that doesn't happen.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Toleraya. Some great insight there. And thank you very much for taking the time. It's a pleasure having you on the programme. And now we stay in Europe for our next story. And 5 new suspects have been arrested on suspicion of stealing jewels from the Louvre Museum and have partially admitted their involvement in the daring daylight heist. However, the stolen treasures remain missing. Authorities said that 4 hooded thieves carried out the robbery on the morning of October the 19th, breaking into the Louvre's Apollo Gallery, home to the French crown jewels, while the museum was open to visitors. The incident has raised serious questions about security measures at the world's most visited art gallery. Paris prosecutor Laura Bacau stated that 2 of the suspects in custody are believed to have entered the museum through an upstairs window, while 2 accomplices waited below to help them escape with the loot. Authorities continue to investigate the heist and are working to locate the remaining suspects and recover the missing crown jewels. Now joining us is Alexander Ciel. He's a French and British journalist. He joins us live from London. Alexander, pleasure to speak to you, as always. Yeah. What more do we know? Some more developments?
Yes, so a 3rd suspect connected with the Louvre heist was arrested in Paris, in the Paris region, and is now in custody. And since then, as you said, there's been a major development, because 5 more people were arrested on Wednesday in the Paris area, according to police sources. So it really comes as part of the same investigation into the jewel theft that took place on the 19th of October. Police are still trying to determine the 3rd suspect's role. Unlike the 2 men, as you said, he was seen below the Louvre, so outside, and maybe he was involved in the logistics, possibly as a getaway driver or as a lookout. So police are going to interrogate him for 96 hours, like the 2 other suspects. But the jewels haven't been found, and 2 suspects were taken into custody last week and have been charged with aggravated theft. So it really raises serious questions about security around museums in France.
And what actions have been made for the security in the Louvre and other museums in France since this dramatic crime has happened?
Yes, so there were audits and interviews with the Louvre's top authorities, and they're planning to rebuild part of the Louvre, to put in new CCTV cameras. But it's really an extremely significant case now, because these 5 arrests suggest police are expanding their focus beyond the core commando to the broader circle, and people who may have helped to plan, finance, or conceal the jewels afterwards. If investigators can link them with the main suspects, it could help recover the stolen pieces or clarify who was really behind the operation. It's really captivated the public in France. A jewel heist inside the Louvre feels almost cinematic. Lots of people have been watching robbery films these last few days in France. But for authorities, it's a serious test of security at one of France's most symbolic institutions. There's a mix of fascination and disbelief, and now real anticipation as the police close in what looks like an organized criminal network behind the theft.
Alexander Ciel, thank you very much for bringing us the update on that. Absolutely fascinating what's going on there. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you all the updates from around the world right here on NewsX World. Thank you for joining us.